Fantastic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Double Diesel Sports Podcast, the podcast where we talk everything National Football League in season off, season it does not matter because it is football. I'm your host, Double Diesel, and welcome to this Week 15 recap of the 2023 NFL season. Before we dive into it, as always, I'd like to ask if you have not done so already to please like, subscribe, and share the video if you have not done so already and you'd like to. That really helps boost the channel's exposure, get us out to more eyeballs, more viewers. So if you've not done so and you'd like to, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you have not done so already, please go support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. Helps put food in my belly, helps support the channel financially. So if you'd like to, the link to that is in the description down below. But let's get on with the show. So week 15 is officially in the books. We have only 3 weeks remaining in the regular season, which is crazy because it feels like this season is just completely flown by. It's hard to believe that the playoffs are just around the corner. But here we are with 3 weeks remaining, and I still have no idea how to properly assess the teams in this league. As far as the playoff caliber teams are concerned. But we will dive into that a little more later in the show. First, I want to talk about something that kicked off this week of football, and that was the Thursday night game between the Easton Stick-led Los Angeles Chargers against the Aiden O'Connell-led Las Vegas Raiders, a game that I was not super excited to watch at first, for obvious reasons. And then it turned into one of the funniest games I've ever seen, with a Raiders team who got shut out the week before, lost 3-0 to the Minnesota Vikings last week in their home building, come right back 4 days later and drop 63 points on the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, the game itself, nothing really much to talk about other than it is the definition of this is a week-to-week league, and it still doesn't compute fully to me how a team that went from scoring 0 points the week before to dropping 63 the next week. Not even a full week later. That still doesn't make full sense to me. One of the reasons why I love this sport. But the main story that came out of this game that we were all just waiting for was the Chargers did it. They finally did it. Brandon Staley is finally, I don't know what took Dean Spanos so long, but Brandon Staley has finally been fired as the head coach of the LA Chargers. And he wasn't alone. The Chargers also fired their general manager, Tom Telesco. So there you go. Head coach, GM, right out the door. The GM I was a little surprised about. I was a little surprised that they let Telesco go because at least before Thursday night, I thought he had done a relatively good job at building the talent on this roster and building this roster for the most part. Until you realize that once this team loses Justin Herbert, they demorph into one of the worst teams in football. I didn't expect that. Like, I wasn't expecting... I expected the Chargers to look, worse offensively with Herbert not being in there, but I didn't expect them to not be competitive at all. So, in that sense, I understand why they fired Telesco. But Staley, this was a move that should have happened before the season even started. I mean, this is a move that should have happened at the end of the offseason after they were up, 27-0 on the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs and then went on to lose that game. I was shocked that wasn't what can Brandon Staley. And we really need to talk about this because I can't say I've never seen because I've seen bigger frauds than this, but it's still hard to believe how a guy who is notoriously been stuck in his ways defensively, has not really made any kind of effort to adjust his defensive schemes, to get away from the Fangio shit that has resulted in his defenses being the biggest one of the bigger laughing stocks of the league. How that guy, when he first got hired, was hailed as this defensive guru. Because in 2020, when he was the defensive coordinator for the LA Rams, he was that coordinator for a team that was the number one unit in the NFL. That was the whole reason he got a coaching job to begin with, was because he was the coach of a number one ranked defense, and that was literally his thing. He was hailed by the Spanos family and by the football world as this incredible, he's the next great defensive mind, and he's going to excel as a head coach because he's so great as a defensive mind. And then you look at his history since his hiring, and you look at his defense's performances, and you go back to those times when he was with the Rams, and you think, okay, is he actually this incredible defensive guru? Or was he hailed as such and had the number one ranked defense because he just so happened to coach a defense that had Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey on it? My guess is it's probably the latter, because I don't know how there was this big of a drop-off in quality, especially considering you can make the argument that his defenses with the Chargers, talent-wise, have more talent on paper than his Rams defenses did. So, what's the big drop-off? What the hell happened there? And it's an answer that I can't really give because I don't know it. I don't know why all of a sudden his defenses just don't work anymore, or why this defensive guru is just his stubbornness and inability to adjust whatsoever. Like, the ability to make in-game adjustments is such a foreign concept for Brandon Staley for whatever reason. And how many times, like, it got to the point where it was laughable. But how many times since he was hired as head coach that he was faced, it felt like he was faced with fourth and short situations at least twice a game. In every game he was the head coach of the LA Chargers. It was laughable how many times his analytics approach was put to the test every single game. And it was noticed. It wasn't like just noticed as a problem. It was noticed as a problem after his first year. It was noticed as an issue where there were multiple games his first year as head coach where he would make weird decisions on fourth and short at weird placements of the field. And then there were times where they'd be presented with fourth and short in a situation where you think they might go for it, and then he would opt not to. And it was just very inconsistent, and it was very hit or miss. And look, I've always been the kind of person been like, hey, if you go for it on certain situations and you make it, you're hailed as a genius. If you don't, you're hailed to look like an idiot. And he looked like an idiot a lot. And that was just in his first year. And then you get to a spot where even despite his clear deficiencies as a head coach that showed up in his first year, he still got that Chargers team in a position where they could still sneak into the postseason. And everyone remembers that Week 18 game on Sunday Night Football between the Chargers and the Raiders, ironically enough. It was a weird situation. It was one of the weirder end-of-season scenarios I've ever experienced as a fan, where it was Chargers win, they get in. Raiders win, they get in. But if they tie, they both get in. So it really was a weird situation going in. And I remember specifically, everyone remembers it, that game ended up going into overtime. The clock was winding down. It was less than a minute to go. And it looked like the Raiders, they had the ball. They looked like they were playing for overtime. And then Brandon Staley does the dumb thing of calling a timeout on a 3rd and short when it clearly looked like the Raiders were just going to play for the tie and they both get in. Brandon Staley calls timeout for whatever reason. And then that results in the Raiders being like, okay, well, screw it. Let's just go for the win and end this now. They get the first down on a run, kick the game-winning field goal. Just like that, the Chargers' playoff hopes were done. When the Raiders were basically quite literally handing them their playoff position. Like, there was a clip that the NBC broadcast caught with Justin Herbert saying, man, I've never wished for a tie so bad. So that was his first real major blunder in time management and just as a coach, where it's like your team is going to benefit from a tie. Your opponent's clearly playing for the tie. What the hell are you doing in that situation? And then the whole debacle last year in the postseason where they were able to actually get in, and then they go up 27-0, and then they end up losing 31-30. They completely collapsed in the second half of that game. And it's just like that. Like, honestly, he should have been fired then. I said it. He should have been fired then. But the Chargers kept them around because, hey, they made the playoffs this past year. They almost made it the year before. So I guess I can understand why they kept them around. But this year was where everything just hit the fan. His defenses were basically made out of Swiss cheese. His offenses were incredibly inconsistent, even when all of his guys were healthy. He's still making incredibly dumb decisions from a time management standpoint and a analytics standpoint. And then came this past Thursday night, where, yes, it says the Raiders scored 63 points, and you could say, well, they scored defensive touchdowns, so it's a bit skewed. Okay, if you take away the defensive touchdowns, that's still 49 points that you gave up to an offense that couldn't score a goddamn thing just 4 days prior. The Raiders were up 42-0 going into halftime. It wasn't like they were up like 28-0 or 28-10 or 28-7 going into halftime. They were up 42-0 at the half. It was so bad that Richard Sherman at the halftime report was talking about the Chargers should make history and fire Staley at halftime. And I know we make that joke a lot of bad head coaches where like, man, I wouldn't let him on the tarmac, or I would just fire him at halftime. And we all say that as a joke, but this was the first time where we were in a real situation where I was like, that, I think that could actually realistically happen here. And it was just mind-numbing to watch. And then the defensive touchdowns at the end to make it 63-21 that ended up being the final score, that just put more salt in the wound, if anything. And we all knew it. We were just waiting for the inevitable news. And I was like, I was shocked if I wouldn't wake up the following morning on Friday and look at Twitter and see that Brandon Staley still had his job. And for a while it looked like that, I'm not going to lie, because I woke up and noon rolled around and I was like, it's still, the announcement still hasn't come. Why isn't it not come yet? And then 1 o'clock rolled around and that's when the announcement finally came out. And it was inevitable. It should have happened a long time ago. And it's kind of funny. In a way, it's funny and it's very poetic. That a guy who was hired for his defensive prowess was hired as the next great defensive mind in this league, gets fired immediately after his team lets up 63 points to a team that got shut out the week before. That's very, very poetic. Now, if that loss didn't happen, would he have survived the season? Probably. Especially considering that there was, at that point, 4 games left in the season. But, like, the fact that that game went the way it did, it would have been a bad look on Spanos if he didn't fire him. Again, I'm shocked it wasn't actually a halftime. I said, I'm not joking when I say, like, I legitimately thought that was actually going to happen for a bit. And you know it's bad when a coach gets asked in the post game, do you know if you're going to have a job tomorrow? And said coach's response is, I don't know. That, like, he knew, and you saw, like, the halftime report, that, like, he knew in that moment, like, well, that's it. I'm not going to have a job. He knew it. You saw it in his eyes. You heard it in his voice. He knew he wasn't going to have a job the next morning. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. But hey, Chargers, congratulations. You're free. But now it's a matter of who you hire. The big name is Bill Belichick. That seems like the most likely because it does seem like New England is definitely going to move on from Belichick in the offseason. And the Chargers is the one team that's circulating out there as far as a potential landing spot for him. Whether New England chooses to fire him or trade him there, that is yet to be determined. But signs do point to it potentially being Bill Belichick as the next head coach for the LA Chargers. Potentially. Obviously, nothing's ever set in stone. But that seems like it might be a real possibility now. But yeah, that's all there is to say about that. And now, let's move on to trying to figure out this hierarchy in the NFL as far as who the elites are and who are contenders, who are not, who are playoff caliber teams, who are not, because we are 15 weeks into the NFL regular season. We have 3 games left to go, and I still don't have full confidence as to who's legitimate contenders and who aren't. Because there are really 2 teams that I think everyone can agree on. There are 2 teams that everyone is confident that, all right, these are the guys, or these are the teams that are most favored to make a Super Bowl run. Those 2 teams are the San Francisco 49ers, which it's been that way since the start of the season, and the Baltimore Ravens. You know, those are really the only 2 teams that have performed well enough consistently for me to look at them and say, yeah, that's a legitimate elite team. Everybody else, it's like they've had these spurts, and then that gives you really hyped about them, that gives you really confident that they can make a championship run, and then they have like 1 or 2 games where they just shit the bed or something catastrophic happens, and it just completely shifts the narrative and shifts your confidence level on them. And this week was full of them. You know, there were a few examples of teams, you know, getting their mojo back, i.e. the Detroit Lions dropping 45 on a Denver Broncos team that was white hot, and they seemed to get their mojo back. That was a big win for them. And then on the other spectrum, you have teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars who, to be honest, I'm just kind of done with the Jacksonville Jaguars and trying to hype them up because they seem to be losing a lot of steam, and Sunday night did not calm those fears of them losing steam and making a big playoff run. But I'm not going to go super in depth with those teams. The teams I am choosing to go into depth with is we're going to start with these teams that were contenders or viewed as contenders at some point in the season, and they've just been really up and down to the point where I can't fully gauge on if I have confidence in them or not. I'll start with the good of these 3 teams, and that good being the Buffalo Bills. Because this was a team that was one of the favorites coming into the season, as they've been for the past few years. And then they've had some up and down games, and then they just went on a stretch where they just did not look good offensively. They looked incredibly one-dimensional. Their defense had taken a bunch of injuries, and they looked not really good. And it was so bad to the point they fired their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. And things were looking very bleak in Western New York. But these last few weeks, they've really gotten it back together to the point where they are now 8-6 and right in the middle of a wild card spot and potentially even a division title. And when you look at how this team has performed over the past few weeks, they've gotten back their offensive mojo. Josh Allen has gone back to looking like the elite top 5 quarterback that we expect him to be. The defense has overperformed at times with the lack of talent now. And then what really got me excited about the Buffalo Bills was what happened this past Sunday with a huge test at home against the Dallas Cowboys after one week removed from the Cowboys obliterating the Philadelphia Eagles. So that this was a big test for them. And let's just keep it a buck. The Bills steamrolled the Dallas Cowboys. And that's not even the most shocking part. The shocking part was how they did it. And this is a reason why I'm so excited about the Bills, is because what was the one thing, when Ken Dorsey was the offensive coordinator, what was the one thing that we've been saying about the Buffalo Bills that they need to do but just refuse to do or can't do or whatever the reason was? Their refusal / inability to run the football. They had a talented back in James Cook, but they just never really used him. Their run designs and their run offense was just horrific. They just did not want to run the football, and they just relied on Josh Allen playing hero ball. Josh Allen was, for the longest time, viewed as their best running back. And there are still games that Joe Brady has taken over as the offensive coordinator. There have still been games where they've leaned more into that for sure. But then Sunday rolls around, and they showed their ability to adapt and to actually look at a defense's weakness, which in this case, the Dallas Cowboys' weakness was their run defense, and said, you know what? Let's just pound the rock. Let's just run the ball down their throat because we know they're not going to be able to stop it. Even though our run game is not the greatest in the world, it's still good enough to attack this weak unit. And how do they attack it? How does 49 total carries sound? 8 of them were by Josh Allen. 2 of them were by Kyle Allen, the other quarterback, in a garbage time. And then the rest were split between James Cook and Latavius Murray. James Cook getting 25 of those carries. So he got nearly half of the run attempts in this game. James Cook, this was James Cook's I'm him game. 221 yards of total offense, both on the ground and in the air. 179 of those were rushing yards. 42 of them were through the air. 1 rushing touchdown, 1 receiving touchdown. Could have had 2 receiving touchdowns, but he dropped one late near the goal line. And he was the Bills' offense in this game, and he just couldn't be stopped. The Cowboys' defense had no answer in stopping James Cook and stopping their running game at all. And all of a sudden, James Cook has now looked like the elite, uber-talented, incredible running back that can take over a game that the Bills expected when they first drafted him in the second round. He's now finally coming into that role, and that is scary because we all know how potent the Bills' passing game is with Allen and Diggs and Gabe Davis on occasion. Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid also coming in as a rookie tight end. We know how potent this passing game is for the Bills. And the one thing we've said over the past few years was if they could just get a running game, this offense can be super deadly. Well, guess what? They've shown that they can have an effective running game. They've shown they can run the football when they want to. And under Ken Dorsey, this game would have never happened if Ken Dorsey was still the offensive coordinator. And it just goes to show again why Joe Brady was getting head coaching consideration a couple of years ago. Because he was the offensive coordinator under Matt Rule in Carolina. He got fired because the offense sucked and he was the scapegoat. And he comes to Buffalo, takes over again as the interim OC. And all of a sudden, this Bills offense is back and clicking again. And even showing new signs of attacking defenses in the way they hadn't before. So this is a team that I'm starting to really get full confidence in. But with that being said, I can't fully ignore what the Bills looked like in the middle of the season, because I do think that Josh Allen's tendencies to play hero ball does show up every now and then, but not nearly as much as it was before Joe Brady took over. But I'm starting to get confidence back in the Buffalo Bills, and they're in a position where they can not only make the postseason, but with their remaining schedule and Miami's remaining schedule, all of a sudden, this team is in a position where they can even get a home playoff game, where just a few weeks ago that looked like a fantasy. So the Bills look back, and they look stronger than ever. But now let's try and figure out these top two teams in the NFCs. Let's try and figure this out for a second, because I have no idea what my opinion is on the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Cowboys, you can definitely make the argument that, hey, this is just one game. You can make that argument for sure, and it was just one really bad game, and they'll get it back together and all that stuff. But the reason why I can't fully go that route is because the Cowboys' bugaboo has been games on the road, and they've lost some really bad games on the road. Obviously the Sunday night slaughter in San Francisco, losing just barely to the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. And then, their first loss of the season in Arizona against a Josh Dobbs-led Arizona Cardinals team. And, that was really humiliating at the time. So, and now you have this, where they didn't score their first points until halfway through, the second half? And by that point, it was basically garbage time already at that rate. And Dak Prescott basically just threw away his chance at winning league MVP in this game. The Cowboys' offense just completely disappeared. The defense couldn't do anything. Micah Parsons was ineffective. But again, that goes to Joe Brady and the Bills' offense doing a great job at making sure he doesn't wreck the game. And all of a sudden, it's like, man, the Cowboys... The fear is if the Cowboys go on the road against one of these great teams, are they going to have games like this? Because they've shown they can have games like this. So it's really concerning about the Dallas Cowboys in that regard. And then another big story is the Philadelphia Eagles, losers of now 3 straight games. They were 10-1 to start the year, and they've now dropped 3 straight to go to 10-4. With those losses obviously coming to the 49ers, a game that we thought was an NFC Championship game preview, and that game wasn't even a contest. They got embarrassed again in Dallas the week before. And then you have Monday night. You have Monday Night Football, where they just didn't look like the Super Bowl caliber dominant Philadelphia Eagles that we've been accustomed to seeing or we expected to see. And they're let's just call a spade a spade. They lost to Drew Lock. And I get it, Drew Lock looked good, and the Seahawks are a good team, and they have talent themselves, and I get that, but the Philadelphia Eagles were a roster built on having a ridiculous amount of talent. We all know the talent that's on this roster. We all know from top to bottom how incredible this roster has been built. On paper, they should be the most dominant team in the NFL, but in practice, even during that stretch where they went 10-1, where they started the year 10-1, there were even quite a few games that they won where I was like, that could have gone a lot smoother. And now you got 3 straight weeks where you had 3 straight really bad losses, 3 straight really humiliating and embarrassing losses at that. And now all of a sudden, the thought of this team making a legitimate Super Bowl run is starting to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And I don't know what the reason was. The defense is not as good as it was last year. The offense definitely is not as good as it was last year. Jalen Hurts has taken a huge step down, it looks like, where he's still a good quarterback, but he's not the MVP caliber quarterback he was last year. And it's really just, it's been really, really weird to see this team kind of collapse before our eyes. Well, I don't want to say collapse, but they're not as good as we thought they were. And I think these last 3 weeks have been really evident of that. And apparently their solution to that was to make Matt Patricia their full-time defensive play caller. And we saw the results of that on Monday night. But yeah, man, the Philadelphia Eagles are in a weird spot that, I'm debating on if they even win this division, because the Cowboys, I feel like, have been more consistent. And at least with the Dallas Cowboys is, if they're playing at home, they're going to be really dominant at home. You at least know that. The Philadelphia Eagles, I don't even have that confidence in them anymore. So, yeah, man, what a fall in confidence in the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that at one point had the best record in the NFL, and now all of a sudden is looking like a team that we don't even know if they're going to be able to play a home playoff game. So that's really that as far as teams that can be legitimate contenders. But let's talk a little about teams that have been very up and down themselves, but I still think could be legitimate playoff caliber teams. First being the Houston Texans. And the Houston Texans, what a fascinating team. This is a team that was picking second overall in the NFL draft this past April, excuse me. And they were coming into the season with a roster that wasn't that talented, with a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback, and didn't really have a whole lot of expectations. And yet here we are, 3 weeks left in the season, in a great spot to make a playoff appearance, potentially even win this division with how Jacksonville's kind of fallen off a little bit. And what makes this even more fun is that CJ Stroud gets concussed last week in a loss to the Jets. That's not the fun part. That's not the fun part. The fun part is they had to start Case Keenum at quarterback, which my heart breaks for Davis Mills in that regard. But they started Case Keenum, and they just do not look the same offensively at all. No Stroud in there, no Tank Dell in there. This offense does not look that good. And, they just couldn't get anything going against a Titans team that felt a little momentum after beating the Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football. And, this looked like a game that the Titans could have won very easily, because Texans just did not look, they didn't look like the Houston Texans we were accustomed to. And yet, despite that, this game still ended up going to overtime, and the Texans ended up winning on the final play of overtime on a walk-off field goal. Huh? How? So, this team looks not anemic offensively, but they don't look nearly as good as they did when Stroud was in there. This looks like an easy win for the Titans that had a bunch of momentum, and the Texans were starting to hit a wall, and it was very clear that they needed CJ Stroud in order to be truly competitive. How does a team that looks like they have no shot at winning this game end up winning this game in overtime? It is just incredible to see, and it just makes this team potentially making the playoffs an even more fun scenario, because now it's like, all right, CJ Stroud, I think he's still in concussion protocol. We don't know if he'll be back this week. If not this week, definitely next week. And which would be great, because they're right in the mix in the AFC for a wild card spot. And with how Jacksonville's fallen off, potentially even the division title, I don't know, Indy is kind of giving them a run for their money, but the Texans have shown that they've been kind of the better team than Indianapolis. I can't remember the tiebreaker situation with them off the top of my head. But yeah, they're right in the mix for a potential AFC South division title in year one of DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud. And this Sunday proved how awesome of a hire DeMeco Ryans has been, because there was no reason for this team to even be competitive this year. There's no reason they should have been competitive or even in that game. And to not only somehow pull a win out of their ass, it just goes to show how great of a hire DeMeco Ryans has been. And I'm so excited to see what they look like when CJ Stroud comes back. And I think some people were a little weary because of the game against the Jets, but that was a great Jets defense that they played against. And yeah, I'm super interested to see what this team is going to look like in these last 3 weeks heading deep into January. I'm really interested to see how they look. And then just one more team that I want to talk about as a potential team that earlier in the year we did not think was going to sneak into the postseason, because their season looked dead in the water. It looked like the sky was falling, and it looked like a lost year. And that team was the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow suffers a season-ending injury to his elbow, and they already were not super hot at that point, so all hope looked lost. It was like, all right, this is a lost year. We're not winning the division. We're probably not even going to make the playoffs at this rate. Lost year. Excuse me. Lost year. Let's just go back to the drawing board and try and figure out next year when Joe Burrow is healthy. In comes Jake Browning, a young man who's been in the league since 2019, who signed as the backup quarterback in the offseason to the Cincinnati Bengals for a 1-year contract worth $750,000. He signed a 1-year deal worth $750,000 to be the backup quarterback here. And all of a sudden, he's being asked to start the rest of the year with the injury to Burrow First game against Pittsburgh didn't look that great. And then for 3 straight games, from the Monday night game against Jacksonville, and then they had the big blowout win against the Indianapolis Colts, and now this past Sunday with a huge overtime win on Saturday against the Minnesota Vikings. A game that had, in my opinion, the play of the year with T. Higgins, where they were driving down the field late in the fourth quarter, and Jake Browning just threw it up. And T. Higgins, who had a couple big drops earlier in this game, went up and snagged it at the 1-yard line, got wrapped up, was getting twisted out of bounds. But before he gets twisted out of bounds, just takes his long-ass arm and reaches it over the pylon for the score. It was an insane play to see. And it was really, it was a remarkable game, but it was, again, a showcase of Jake Browning is keeping this team afloat. And not just keeping him afloat, he is really playing extremely well. 2 of these last 3 games, he's had over 300 yards passing. And he's just been the perfect captain to run the ship. And there's not a shadow of a doubt that he's definitely earned himself some money in the offseason, whether it's to stay on board in Cincinnati or to go try and get a starting job somewhere else, because he's proven he can be a starting caliber quarterback. He's shown that he can play. He's definitely worth a shit ton more than the $750,000 he was getting paid already. So the Jake Browning saga is, I mean, in a year where it's really been the year of the backup quarterback, with so many different quarterbacks coming in and getting starts, whether it's for injured quarterbacks or guys who just didn't perform well and got benched. This year has really been the year of the backup quarterback, and he's might have arguably been the best out of all of them. If not, he's definitely up there as far as the best performing backups. So that's a really fun story to follow. And the Bengals, because look, the Bengals are still an incredibly talented roster. They're still good enough to win these kind of games. But the fear was, how are they going to look with Joe Burrow not being in there? And now we don't have that fear anymore. We know, okay, Jake Browning is at least good enough to keep this team afloat. Are they going to make a Super Bowl run? Probably not. Are they good enough to make the playoffs? Damn right they are. And again, they're right in the mix. They're right in the mix with all of those teams. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how these last 3 weeks play out. But, like I said, that is going to put a wrap on the video today. Like I said, if you have not done so already, please like, subscribe, and share the video if you have not done so and you'd like to. Also, if you want to support the channel and support me, go to the link down below for my Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. With that being said, I'm Double Diesel. Peace.